Welcome, guys. Today we are going to see top 13 interview questions from React.js. First, what is React? React is an open source JavaScript library developed by Facebook for building user interfaces, especially for single page applications. It allows developers to create reusable UI components and manage the view of their effort efficiently. React uses a virtual DOM to optimize rendering and ensure high performance. What are components in React? Components in React are the building blocks of React application. They let you split the UI into independent reusable pieces that can be managed separately. Each component can have its own state and logic. There are two types of components, functional components and class components. What is the difference between functional and class components? The main difference between functional and class components in React is how they manage state and lifecycle methods. Function components are simple JavaScript functions that use move like useState and useEffect, while class component use this.state and lifecycle methods such as component did work. Function components are now preferred for their simplicity and readability. What is JSX? JSX is a syntax extension for JavaScript used in React to write HTML-like code within the JavaScript. It makes the code more readable and allows developers to describe the UI structure in declarative way. JSX gets compiled to React.createElement calls. For example, const element equal to h1 tag hello JSX closing the h1 tag. Here in the JavaScript code, we are returning HTML element. What is a state in React? State in React is an object that holds dynamic data and determines a component's behavior and rendering. It allows components to create and manage their own data internally. When the state changes, the component automatically re-renders to reflect the new data. What is props in React? Props in React are used to pass data from parent component to child component. They are read-only and help make components reusable by allowing them to receive dynamic values. What is the virtual DOM? The virtual DOM is a lightweight JavaScript representation of the actual DOM. React uses it to optimize performance by keeping a virtual copy of the UI in memory. When state or prop changes, React compares the new virtual DOM with the previous one and updates only the changed parts in the real DOM, making rendering more efficient. What is the use of useState hook? The useState hook is used in functional components to add and manage state. It returns a state variable and a function to update it. Then the state is updated, the component re-renders with the new value. For example, const count, set count equal to useState. Here count holds the current value, set count updates it. What is useEffect hook? The useEffect hook lets you perform side effects in functional components such as data fetching, subscription, or manual changing the DOM. It runs after the component renders and can be controlled to run only when certain value changes. In this below example, whenever the count changes, by using the useEffect, the count will be updated. What are the keys in React? Keys help React identify which item have changed, are added, or removed. They must be unique among the siblings. In the below example, in the map function, we will be passing item.id as a key. What is lifting state up in React? Lifting state up in React means moving the shared state from child components to their closest common parent. This allows multiple components to access and update the same state, enabling better coordination and data flow between them. What is React fragment? React fragment lets you group multiple elements without adding extra nodes to the DOM. It's useful when you want to return multiple elements from a component without wrapping them in a div or another HTML tag. What is control component? A control component in React is a form element, for example input, text area or select, whose value is controlled by React state. The component state is the single source of the truth and any user in input values the state via event handlers. What is an uncontrolled component? An uncontrolled component is a form element and the form data is handled by the DOM itself. Instead of React state, you access its values using refs rather than managing it with a state. What is prop drilling? Prop drilling is the process of passing data through multiple nested components by sending props down the component tree. Even if intermediate component doesn't need the data, this can make code harder to manage, and is often solved using context API or state management libraries. What is context API? The context API in React provides a way to share data across the component tree without passing props manually at every level. It helps avoid prop drilling by allowing any component to consume the shared data directly. What is React Router? React Router is a library used in React application to handle client-side routing. It enables navigation between different components or pages without reloading the entire app, making the single page app feel like multi-page websites. What is lazy loading in React? Lazy loading in React means loading components only when they are needed rather than upfront. This improves performance by reducing the initial load time. It's done using React.lazy and suspense. What is the purpose of useRef? The useRef hook creates a mutable object that persists across renders and is commonly used to directly access or interact with DOM elements. It can also store any mutable value without causing re-renders when updated. What is reconciliation in React? Reconciliation in React is the process of comparing the new virtual DOM with the previous one to identify which has changed. React then efficiently updates only the parts of the real DOM that need to be changed, improving the performance and user experience. What is memoization in React? Memoization in React is an optimization technique that caches the result of a function or component to avoid unnecessary recalculation or re-render. For components, React.memo is used to prevent re-rendering when props haven't changed. What is useMemo hook? The useMemo hook memoizes the results of an expensive calculation and recomputes it only when its dependencies change. This helps improve performance by avoiding unnecessary recalculation at every render. What is the use of useCallback hook? The useCallback hook returns a memoized version of a callback function that only changes if one of its dependencies changes. It helps prevent unnecessary recreations of function, which is useful when passing callback to optimize the child components. What is higher order component? A higher order component HOC is function that takes a React component and returns a new enhanced component. It used to add common functionality or behavior to multiple components without repeating code. What is diffing? Diffing is the process React used to compare the previous virtual DOM with the new virtual DOM to detect what has changed. By identifying these differences efficiently, React updates only the necessary part of the real DOM. What is Redux? Redux is a predictable state management library often used with React. It centralizes an application state in a single store and updates it via actions and reducers, making state changes more predictable and easier to debug. What is the difference between Redux and Context API? The Context API is built into React and is best for passing data through few levels of components or for simple state sharing. Redux is more powerful external library designed for managing complex, large-scale state with strict rules, middlewares, and debugging tools. Redux offers better control and scalability than Context API. What is React Strict Mode? React Strict Mode is a development tool that helps identify potential problems in an application. It activates additional checks and warnings for things like deprecated APIs, side effects, or unsafe write cycles, but it doesn't affect the production bit. How do you handle events in functional components? Events in functional components are handled using inline functions or callback functions similar to HTML, but written in camel case and passed as props. How can you optimize performance in functional components? Performance can be improved by using React.memo to prevent unnecessary redundance, useMemo and useCallback to memorize values and functions, and lazy loading components with React.lazy to load them only when needed, reducing the initial bundle size. Thanks for watching.